Hello, you dirty potters. How are you today? In today's episode, I want to talk to you about an intermediate technique called stretching. What is stretching, Dante? Well, I'm glad you asked, beautiful person who's already on your way to clicking the like button right now. Stretching is a technique that's usually done with wheel-thrown ceramics, where you cut either a layer, marks, or carve a certain amount of your clay off and stretch the skin in order for it to make a nice pattern. This is something that's done in a lot of my work when I make what I don't officially call Japanese tea bowls, because technically speaking, they're just practice tea bowls. I feel like I would have to have someone teach me how to make real ones, but I do practice making them, and whenever I make them, I want a type of unorganized, unplanned, organic feel to them, and this is a very easy way to do that for me. Now, I do want to be clear in this video that I'm not going over centering, I'm not going over pulling. This is an intermediate technique, so I sort of assume that you already know how to do those things. This technique assumes that you're either learning or you already know how to keep track of a certain amount of skin in between when you're pulling that cylinder. You will need to keep track of how thin your cylinder is when you're throwing. Other than that, the technique is fairly easy. Firstly, let's go over how to do the technique, and then I'm going to go over some fine pointers that might help you do this technique in the future. A little potter tip here, make sure you get a little bit more clay than you think you need. For example, whenever I make bowls, they're about 12 to 14 ounces of clay for the size that I like to make my bowls and sell on my website, earthnationceramics.com. But for this technique, you're gonna want at least maybe a half times more to maybe even double the amount of clay if you're not really used to measuring out how much thickness you have in the middle of your cylinder. This is a technique where you will be purposely stretching the clay body out and not making a straight cylinder. And as you stretch, you're stretching the skin thinner and thinner, which means you just need more skin in the middle of your cylinder as you're throwing. You know, and just as a small example, I want to show you what stretching looks like on a normal basis. Many of your teachers are probably going to call this popping out the cylinder, and it's akin to whenever you make a bowl, you're pushing from the inside to the outside trying to form that pot. And this is essentially what it looks like on a normal basis. And what you're essentially doing is you're putting your fingers on the inside and you're pushing outwards as the wheel spins on a consistent basis with nice, even pressure. So I'm pushing from the inside, I'm coming out, and I'm stretching the skin of the clay. This is essentially me stretching out a bowl. This is not what we call stretching, but this is what is entailed within the technique of stretching. I just wanted to be clear about that. You're basically doing this, but with a much larger piece of clay. We're going to destroy this.
Help me! I'm being held against
Yeah,
my
nope,
will.
don't struggle.
My address is
Don't struggle,
123
we're
help.
destroying you. Now that you've centered and opened, from this point on, this is where you really have to keep track of the thickness of your clay body. Most of you have probably been taught the 3-pull rule, or you've probably experienced your clay body getting a little too thin while you're pulling. This is where you need to back off of that. So what I do is just a good old spider pull, or I only pull one time, and I make sure I have a very thick clay body. That right there is enough for me. That's a very thick cylinder. Potter tip! You can, if you want, although I don't think it helps too much, get a pin tool, stick it into the thickest part of your clay body, wait until it pokes your finger on the other side, don't hurt yourself, and once it pokes your finger on the other side, and you barely feel it on the inside, put your finger here, pull this out, and you can tell how thick your actual clay body is if you want to. I want to be clear, I don't think this helps very much, but this is a pretty good indicator in showing how thick your clay body is when you throw. And keep in mind, this is going to vary. I poked this in right here, but if I poke it in down here, where generally speaking, clay is a little thicker. See, now we have a thicker clay body down here. And that's just because, generally speaking, clay is thicker at the bottom until you pull that clay from the bottom to the top. So don't make the mistake of thinking that just because you have good thickness here, that it's automatically good here. This does have varying degrees, but I think this thickness for now is fine. Now from here comes the difficult part. From here, it's necessary to understand that clay isn't just kind of one item. It's many, many layers, just like skin of one body. Just like your skin, you have a dermis, an epidermis, and multiple different layers of skin. And clay kind of has that same thing. Your goal now is to cut off a portion of these layers without going through the clay body. I like to use my good old wire tool. And once you get to the bottom, pull outwards and it should just come right off. This is the reason why I told you to make sure you have a bit more clay than you usually throw with if you're trying to throw a specific form. You will be cutting off like a third, if not a fourth, of the clay body that you originally started with, and it won't end up in the forming process. So make sure you do work with a bit more clay than you're used to. Otherwise, you're probably going to go through the clay body because that's what you're used to working with. From here, we're going to form the pot as much as we can because we know it's going to be very difficult to touch the outside. So I'm going to cut the skirt off right now so that I don't have a lot of trouble in the trimming phase. I'm not going to use my metal rib like I usually do, and we're only going to touch the inside of the pot. And at the end of this, you should see the skin stretched and the pattern will change a bit. There we go, much better. You can probably see what I meant now when I said this kind of accidentally looks done on purpose, and it really goes for that type of wabi-sabi aesthetic feel that looks a little bit more organic. That person kind of let the clay becomes what it wanted to become. And this is why I like this technique, is because it makes things look very much like this. No doubt you have most likely seen someone do a very tall cylinder, stretch that thing very thin and high, take those serrades out like I did right here, and stick their entire wet, solid hand and fist in there as if they were trying to get treasure out of the Temple of Doom. That is an extreme version of what I'm showing you here today. Be very careful with the amount of thickness that you have in your clay body. One of the reasons why I deem this an intermediate technique is because you need to understand how thick your clay body is in the middle of your cylinder. And I know I've said that before, but if you stretch this too thin, it will end up tearing and collapsing, and it's very difficult to repair, and you'll most likely have to start over. When you first make the cylinder, you're gonna go, yeah, that's enough clay, and you'll stretch it, and you'll notice that you're getting more of a pattern as you stretch it, and this will in turn egg you on to stretch it even more and more and more. The more you stretch, the more of a distorted kind of wabi-sabi pattern that you get, and you're gonna wanna stretch this as far as possible. So while you're thinking that's enough room, it's probably not enough room in thickness. But if you stretch this too far and too thin, one of two things will happen. You'll either end up distorting the pattern way too much to the point where it just kind of looks like it was truly done on accident, or you'll end up tearing a hole through the actual clay body that you made too thin. The second thing, and one of my favorite things, is that you can technically technique stack. This is getting two techniques and stacking them together for a compounded effect. Let's make one more of these things so I can show you. Let's make an interesting pattern right here. Remember how I talked about clay body being kind of like human skin, that it technically comes in layers? Well, that's more true than you think it is. When the top layer of your skin gets dried out from whatever exposure you're having at the moment, you'll most likely still retain more moisture the deeper the layers you go into your skin. And that's sort of true for clay bodies as well. And I know it's a little weird to think about, but you can get something that dries out a layer of clay, especially the top layer, the epidermis if you will, and the rest of the clay body will still retain its moisture. If I brush a layer of this onto this clay body and I wait 10 minutes, then it will dry out the top layer of the skin, and it makes the stretching effect even more beautiful and organic looking. A little potter tip here: if you're doing this at home, make sure to take a brush that you do not like. People who are a little more experienced will either get a heat gun or a torch. And I don't really want you to play with fire in the studio, and I bet your studio owner or anyone who lives in the house with you probably doesn't want you to do that either, to carry around a propane tank of just fire all the time because you want to make dirt into pretty shapes. So if you're going to do this, I suggest you use a heat gun instead. Still be careful of this. After you use a heat gun, I want you to be very careful. Do not touch the silver nozzle. It will be very, very hot. But we can forcibly make this dry out way faster by giving this a heat gun treatment for about a minute or so. Slowly spin while heat gun go brrr. That should be good right there. That only took us about 30 seconds. You'll know it's ready because it'll feel very dry to the touch. The inside will still feel wet, however the outside will feel extremely dry. We've already made our texture. We're gonna put a little water on the inside. Be sure not to get on the outside. We're gonna stabilize our hand and push from the inside to the outside. And watch what happens to the clay body. It should naturally start to crack open. These cracks are a result of the top layer of the clay body drying out while I push from the inside. And we can make these a lot more stretchy if we continue to stretch this body out. Unfortunately, I didn't leave enough skin in the clay body to stretch it out even more. We have successfully stacked two techniques into one. We are going to save this, actually, because I like it, and I'm gonna sell it. I'm gonna sell it. Well, thank you, Dirty Potters, for joining me today so I can show you the stretching technique. You know, it's not that difficult of a technique, to be honest with you, but it does require some intermediate attention. It's really difficult to learn this technique if you're just learning how to center and you're learning how to pull a cylinder, because the entire crux of the technique is that you're able to stretch enough skin outwards to make the pattern look a little bit malformed. But of course, you need more skin to do that. So you firstly need to work with a little more clay than you're used to. And secondly, you need to make sure there's more clay in the middle of that cylinder than usual. Otherwise, when you make your lacerations or your pattern by cutting through the clay body, you're most likely going to cut through the clay body to some extent. And that makes sure that you start all over. Try this technique and let me know how it goes in the comments below. I love your Dirty Potter faces, and I will see you guys next week.
Thank you for your patronage.